Hey everybody, thanks again for watching our ongoing coverage of the tropics, in particular Henri, which is expected to make landfall somewhere in the northeastern part of the country in the next 36 to 48 hours. I'm Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson. I know it's late, it's just a couple minutes before midnight here in the East Coast. We wanted to go ahead and do this because we know folks will come back and look at this later, and this should hold until the new info comes in at 5 a.m. So we have a lot to get to. Of course, not only do we have Henri, but we also have Major Hurricane Grace that is not a threat to the U.S., but is expected to move into Mexico very shortly as a major hurricane with winds at 120 miles an hour. So let me show you both of those real quick in the app, and you can of course see Grace on the lower left, Henri on the upper right, and Grace has continued to look more and more impressive today. You can see that there is a much more symmetry with the thunderstorms as they continue to wrap around that center. It rapidly intensified today. The Hurricane Center upgraded it to a Category 2 earlier this evening, and then went ahead and bumped it back up to a Category 3 with winds at 120, and again very close to landfall. It's expected to create widespread flash flooding, mudslides, and very dangerous conditions in Mexico, and then cross the country and move into the Pacific Ocean as well, and reemerge with a new name there. So we'll get you updated on that. But of course, the bigger fish to fry, so to speak, is Henri tonight, and what that will mean for the northeastern part of the country. So as we try and take a look at this, again, the rain shield with this particular cyclone is very large as well. So you see a lot of yellows. What you don't see, of course, is a center or a what would be a closed low with a hurricane force strength around that center. But you do see some reds there on the south side of the cyclone, and that's been kind of the telling story the last couple of hours. Generally speaking, we tend to see those higher rain returns up in the northeast side of these cyclones, but this system has not been vertically stacked at all. We've seen kind of an elongated multiple vortex, if you can, one at the mid levels, and then there's one a little bit lower at the surface that's more towards the south and east, and that's kind of where you're seeing some of that presentation with some of those higher rain rates, but nonetheless expected to get into a hurricane category before it makes landfall somewhere potentially along Long Island on Sunday. So let's talk about the new warnings, because those have been upgraded from the National Hurricane Center as well. And I'll go ahead and read them off to you, because there is quite a bit of changes again for this advisory. Typically, we don't see a lot of changes once they do a big shift or a big upgrade in the package in terms of the warnings. We tend not to see a big change, but yet again, this update, we've seen a fair amount of changes. So I'm going to read them to you. New with this advisory, the storm watch that was up for parts of New York has been upgraded to a warning, and that includes Greenwich, Connecticut, over to Flushing, New York, as well as Oyster Bay, New York. Tropical storm warning is now in effect for Watch Hill, Rhode Island, east to Woods Hole, Massachusetts, including Block Island, Martha's Vineyard, and a tropical storm warning is now also in effect for East Rockaway Island, New York, to Manasquan Inlet in New Jersey, and now that includes New York City. So earlier, New York City was under a tropical storm watch that's been upgraded to a tropical storm warning. And of course, we have storm surge warnings, what we'll show you as well. So you can see the upgraded information here on the map. And likely going to see, it depends on the ultimate track of Henri. If we see it come in more towards the east, we're going to see those watches that are up over near Nantucket upgraded to a warning. But the thinking is that it's actually going to come further in towards the left or towards the west as we get into Sunday. So here's a look at those upgraded storm surge warnings. And again, a big area of real estate up in these New England states. Connecticut under the gun, Long Island under the gun. And depending on the ultimate path, as I mentioned, many of the surrounding states, Rhode Island, even over into parts of the Cape Cod area, a little less, I think, tonight for Cape Cod, but it depends on the ultimate entry point of Henri and what we're going to see with that northeast onshore flow that could really create a very dangerous storm surge. So the Hurricane Center still keeps the storm surge 1 to 3 feet along Jersey's coastline there, and then 2 to 4 foot as we get towards East Rockaway, Fire Island, and then Montauk. It's going to go up to 3 to 5 feet. And again, we think the surge will probably be worse, will be the worst in Montauk, and then over up into Rhode Island near, and I always say this wrong, Narragansett, I think is how you say it. And I apologize if I said that wrong. It's late, and I would tend to fumble that one all the time. But anyway, also all the way over to Nantucket, up to Cape Cod Bay, 3 to 5 feet. And we'll see, the Hurricane Center might change that, tweak that if we see a system that comes in a little bit more towards the left or towards the west. Here's a look at the infrared. And as I showed you from our earlier update that we did, I think it was around 7 p.m., I think is the last one we did. But I wanted to point out a couple of things. So we're getting some nice outflow here, some of that cirrus. I talked about that engine, how these are just like big heat-seeking machines, and they scoop up all this latent heat that's in the Atlantic basin, and then they basically absorb it up all through the core of that storm and then exhaust it out like an engine that would come out over here with these cirrus. So we're starting to see some more cirrus, but what we've seen over here is some erosion here on the north and the west side, and we've also seen this little notch I talked about as well, just not really indicating a super well organized tropical storm, and that's why it remains a tropical storm. And look, there's kind of two separate bursts of convection. So we have the main larger dense central dense overcast right here, and then we have a secondary one down towards the south. And this is actually where we think the center is. It's more down in this region, but we're getting a lot of these storms kind of blowing up here on the north and the east side. So again, not vertically stacked, but trying to get more so. And there is a little bit of a window here for it to get a little bit stronger in the next 12 to 24 hours. And then that window is going to kind of shrink, and we're going to lose the ability for this to get strong, or much more intense. But the thinking is there's a little bit more room to do so. So as of 11 p.m., the winds are at 70 miles an hour, the pressure 994, moving north at 9. That puts it 230 miles southeast of Cape Hatteras. And then there's several things that we're looking at for steering currents. I have some new maps that I built from the last time that we did our update, so I'm going to show you those. But generally, we're going to see kind of like this hook, and I talked about this in our 7 o'clock update, that there was some of this thinking that we would see this little bit of a jog towards the left and then that sharp hook back towards the right. And the models have been agreeing with this scenario most of the day today. So, this is looking more and more likely that we're going to get a little squeeze play here between an upper level low in the Ohio River Valley and a ridge of high pressure to the east of Henri, and then a high pressure to the north of it as well. And you can see those winds still packing a punch all through Sunday. Monday, of course, rapidly decreasing in intensity, but the rain is what I'm concerned about as well. So it'll be interesting to see tomorrow when the new models come in, what kind of data we get. And if we're going to see an uptick in some of those potential rain totals, which have been in the neighborhood of 5 to 7, but I think that's underdone in several areas. I do think we're going to likely see a little bit more of that. Here's a look at those models that, as I mentioned, at least through day 3, very tightly clustered over the northeastern states, and then we start to see that that divergence as we get into days 4 and 5. That's not unusual, but they also are starting to get a little closer and closer together, which would indicate we're starting to see some more agreement in the samplings that these models are looking at the atmosphere. They're looking at the samplings of the atmosphere to try and determine where this actually will head. So here's a couple of those key players. So but I'm going to point these out to you, and then I'll scrub this forward. So here's our low pressure center, our upper level low. And then I have this as a category 1. It is not a category 1 right now. As you know, it's a tropical storm, but I'm kind of going forward in time for tomorrow, assuming that it will be a category 1. Hit ridge of high pressure over here. This is the Bermuda high, and then we have another high up here in Canada. And all of these systems are going to be helping to dictate how and what Henri does. So as I'm going to scrub this forward, notice how I've got this at the 850 millibar layer. So you notice how we see that general track towards the north. So the upper level low will pull Henri northward. It's already been doing that, and we continue to see that setup as we head through the remainder of tonight and into tomorrow. The high in the western Atlantic will help that northeast track on days 4 and 5, but so will that high that's over Canada will help to shunt it or really accelerate it quickly back into the Atlantic basin by days 4 and 5. Now, if Henri gets trapped under this upper level circulation, a hook to the left before ejecting to the northeast is possible, and that's basically what we see with the past. So we see that little hook towards the left, and this is really just an atypical pattern, by the way, for a landfall. I'm going to show you some historical data as well, and then we see that rapid acceleration towards the right or towards the northeast. So not a typical scenario, not a pretty typical climatologically a path that we would expect to see. So here's a look at some of these historical hurricanes. I pulled up 4 or 5 of them, and let me move this up here, and I'll just scrub it along, and then I'm going to stop it when we get up into the Northeast. So here comes, let me back that up a minute so you can see the names. So there's Bob, Gloria, Donna, and Carol, and all of these were in the 1990s and in the 1980s. So Bob is the one that a lot of people have been talking about, because this one earlier today was closest aligned to the computer models, but all of these take a turn towards the Northeast and away from the U.S. Henri has the path of where it's forecast to actually move inland and stay over, parts of New York and up into the southern New England states, and then turn towards the Northeast. So there's really no path here that is very similar to what Henri is forecast to do. And I looked at about 16 storms from 1851 to 2021, and these were the closest ones that had a path that was similar to what Henri is forecast to do. A hurricane, not a tropical storm, not a tropical depression. We're talking about hurricanes because Henri is expected to be a hurricane at landfall. So that's what's, the interesting setup here. And I will add, Henri is expected to stay overland longer than these other systems that I just showed you. So again, that increases the hazards, the risks, the impacts, and it's expected to also grow in size. So a lot of times when we get these cyclones that come up in the higher latitudes, they tend to grow larger in size, not necessarily strength, but just bigger cloud deck, more geography that it will cover when it makes a landfall, and that means more weather hazards. So that's the other concern with Henri, that it's going to get larger in size and therefore affect more people. And I mentioned in the live stream that I did at 7 that I was watching a press conference, and it was with the officials in Connecticut, and I went back and I looked on Twitter and watched and looked at the feed from the officials up in Connecticut, and they think if this path holds that's currently forecast, that as many as 1 million people could be without power for some period of time if Henri takes the current forecast track. So that's just in Connecticut. So we're still talking about major hazards in Long Island. You know that area. If you know that area of the country, you know that it's very prone to flooding, and it's very susceptible to hurricanes or tropical systems and their weather hazards. So the thinking is it's going to get pretty rough out there if it actually moves into Long Island as its entry point before it moves northeast. So here's a look at the HRRR. This is a high resolution model, and it shows that, again, the bulk of the rain stays to the right or on the east side, and that's typical for a system. So it doesn't look like the Carolinas will get a lot of weather. However, they are going to get dangerous swells from this, and they're going to have dangerous rip currents all along the Atlantic seaboard from Henri that will last starting this weekend and last probably until Monday or Tuesday. So scrubbing this up, and you can see the official path from the Hurricane Center, you still see that jog towards the left, kind of that hook towards the left, and then that hook back towards the right. It's just a very unusual scenario that we don't see often in tropical cyclones. So again, this will all be determined in the next 36 hours, but so far the modeling has been pretty consistent, and we'll see how that all verifies in the next 1 to 2 days. So another look at what's going on with the rain potential. As I mentioned, this is something that I think we'll get another update from the Weather Prediction Center, and we'll see what they come out with. But so far they're estimating 5 to 7 inches of rain up into the Long Island, southern New England states, and then 1 to 3 through parts of New Jersey, maybe a little bit of the Mid-Atlantic, Delmarva area. But I think some of that could be underdone. Again, especially if this is a slow mover, it could be something that could even bring in a lot more rain than that. Here's a look at the arrival of the tropical storm force winds. So this is starting to take into account the current trajectory that the Hurricane Center has. So really we're going to start to see those winds degenerate early Sunday morning. So this is the likelihood of seeing tropical storm force winds. So if you see the purple there or the reds, that's an indication that you have about a 70 to 80% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds. And that's, of course, certainly doable given the fact that we think this is going to come in as a Category 1. And then, some of those wind fields expand all the way out through parts of, western New York, western Pennsylvania. So those will not be sustained winds out there. Those will be, gusts around 20, 25 miles an hour, but but certainly it's going to have a pretty big impact across a big area that has a lot of people that live up there, of course. Northeastern part of the country in terms of the wind, this is another model product that I think is underdone, but I'm going to show it to you just because I can give you some guidance here. So as we head into tomorrow, most of the wind field stays around 20-25 miles an hour in gusts. I don't really anticipate too much tomorrow. Tomorrow's the day to make your final preps. And then as you look here, the modeling starts to get in that 25-30 mile an hour range, 30-35 mile, maybe up to 50. Again, this is the European model that I'm using. Does a pretty decent job trying to land, pinpoint hazards, but I think this one is definitely underdone. But just showing it to you to give you some guidance in terms of where that wind field is going to come in at and the areas that will see the greatest impact, which of course at this point we think is going to be Connecticut and Long Island. Quick look at the sea surface temperatures. This is also something that we look at often when we're trying to figure out what these systems can do. And once you get up into north of the Gulf Stream, you kind of level off pretty sharply with those sea surface temperatures. So that's why we think there's only about 24 hours left to use those warm sea surface temperatures in the Gulf Stream to help feed the appetite of Henri. So once it gets up, again, close to a landfall, we think it's going to level off. And the Hurricane Center said tonight in their update at 11 p.m. that they don't see any reliable guidance that takes this above a Category 1. So hopefully that's a silver lining. It's bad enough it's coming in as a hurricane, and the impacts, as I mentioned, are going to be pretty extensive along the Atlantic seaboard with dangerous rip currents accompanied by dangerous surf conditions and very, very dangerous swells. So not a good weekend to head to the beaches anywhere along the Atlantic seaboard, especially up towards the north. But even the Carolinas, as I mentioned, are going to have some significant impacts as we head into this weekend in terms of those large swells coming out in the outer rotation of Henri. Okay, I think that's the last map I have in here. Let me go back to the app real quick, Matt. We'll take a quick look at that, and then we'll take the stream down. But just wanted to show you the app again, because there again is you see how symmetrical Henri is. A couple of days ago, it was much less impressive in terms of that cluster of thunderstorms, and you're starting, as I mentioned, to see those storms fill in on the south and the west side, but you're starting to see that last frame, a little bit of those reds pulled northward, and you kind of see a trend there where it looks like that they're trying to get a little bit more organized to the north and to the east. So we do think we'll see some strengthening tonight, and the wind shear is expected to relax a bit tomorrow. That's why we think the potential is there to get a little bit stronger before we get to landfall. And I do have the power outages turned on, by the way. Of course, we're not seeing anything directly related from Henri, but this is going to be quite the color board tomorrow and especially Sunday. Just real quick, just in Steuben County, there's an outage of about 600 people. But as we mentioned, there could be millions, potentially millions of people without power for some length of time if Henri takes the current forecast track. So I think that's going to do it for now, you guys. Oh, actually, let me put it back on the watches and warnings before we, and actually I'll put it right there so you guys can look at those one more time. So I think that's going to do it for now with this late update. Again, now we won't get another full package of information from the Hurricane Center until 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. So we'll have another update for you guys tomorrow morning. Of course, we're working on the fast forecast right now as well. Matt Hyland is joining me, of course, in helping with that. So we'll be putting that together as soon as we take this stream down, and then we'll have information for you all weekend long. Jamie Martin will be in, as well as we're going to have correspondent Matthew Capucci, who is a brilliant meteorologist, and you may know him on Twitter. He has a pretty big following. He'll be out in the field helping to track Henri and give some of the science behind the setup of Henri and what he sees with the clouds, and explains what they're doing. And we'll talk about surge, and we'll talk about all kinds of things to help unpack some of this very complicated soon-to-be hurricane. So that will do it for now, you guys. Thank you so much again. I know there's not many people watching. It's late, but again, I taped this or doing this live stream so people can go back and look at it. And we'll be back here tomorrow. And of course, we'll have team coverage on Sunday and potentially Monday as well. That's going to do it for now. I hope you guys up in the Northeast are getting ready. I know you guys have seen many of these systems over the years, but this one certainly is likely going to be a pretty big deal, seeing that we haven't seen this kind of a system up in that region since 1991. So stay safe, get prepared, and we will see you here this weekend.